We're live.
Yes. Welcome in. It's the Tim McKernan Show podcast. My name is Timothy Michael McKernan. That's Jackson Bennett Burkett, and we welcome you to participate in the program anytime you want. And you listen to it on the Tim McKernan Show podcast feed anytime you want. It's QFTA. We're doing it daily. T. McKernan at InsideSTL.com. TMCKERNAN at InsideSTL.com is how you can send your emails in. We're on YouTube Live, usually in the 11 o'clock hour. Sometimes it changes. I'm going in there right now, Jackson, and Carl Pelker's in there. Alan Dadeville's in there. I'm kind of an Alan Dadeville lemming.
I'm a big fan.
And we welcome anybody who wants to join in the conversation to participate in the YouTube chat. We glance at it throughout the course of the podcast. We thank Longo Biggs for their studio sponsorship online at longobigs.com, LONGOBIGGS.com. We thank James Carlton of the Carlton State Farm Insurance Agency online at carltoninsurance.net for his sponsorship. Seth Goldcamp of Design Air Heating and Cooling online at designairservice.com for his sponsorship. Munganess, St. Louis Acura, Munganess, Burkhardt, Alton Toyota online at stlouisacura.com and altontoyota.com. That's Munganess, Burkhardt, Alton Toyota, and stlouisacura.com. Jamie Burkhardt, Clayton Patterson, Peter Munganess, and the wonderful people in the service department such as Ryan Seiberg. And Jackson, we also are grateful for Mark Hanna of Evergreen Wealth Strategies online at evergreenstl.com. Are you feeling frisky?
Yeah, always. I'm feeling frisky.
You want to talk about slutting?
Yeah, that's usually what we do when we sit in here.
Talk about slutting. Alan Dadeville says, I'm a fan of you boys too. Daily QFTA has been a nice way to spend my paternity leave lately.
Nice
paternity leave. Yeah, God bless. Congratulations, Alan Dadeville. I got this one called up. I said to Jackson, I said, I'm going to, it might be good when I'll save erotic stories and I'll read those first time, but I think it's better for the pod. You like that?
Love.
If I I'm not just sifting through and going, I've already read this one, so I actually did prep today. Prep was going through my email. Gentlemen, this is a question that was asked a week ago today, as a matter of fact. How did Email of the Day come about? When did it start? For as long as I've listened, the order has been Doug, Iggy, Tim, Plowsy, insert producer, Jackson. I assume this is just a random order that stuck, but it's been so consistent for so long, I have to wonder if there's a story behind that too. Thanks. That's from J. Randolph Jr., fan page club champion, Dogtown Tie. Well, Jackson, Dogtown Tie, congratulations on your win. You're very lucky that the Pope cheated to beat me. I like this because it allows me to tell a story and also give some TMA history.
Yeah.
And I think I'm going to be in and out today. Now, I say that, and we might be here at 3 o'clock. It's 11:31 as I say that.
I got time today.
Okay. When I first started, we just got done doing balloon parties. We're fresh off of getting hated. What is the most common hate I get? What's the most common hate you get?
The biggest hate you get is that you're self-important.
Yeah, but that's accurate.
Okay. Well, I'd still say that it's that.
Yeah.
And then for me, it's lack of sports knowledge.
But it's just really lack of hockey knowledge.
Right, but people equate that to...
You see.
Because it's like, hockey is like 50% of the sports in this town. I'm like, yeah, but we live in the world. Either way.
So when I started, you could never guess, even if I gave you, I think, 1,000 guesses and said, I'll give you $1,000. There's no point to me doing it if you guess correctly what the hate was. The hate was that I was a Jim Rome ripoff.
Oh, okay.
The hate just changes over the years.
Yeah.
And the reason for that was because I would read emails on the show.
Right. Some Rome was very famous for.
Right. But I just thought we were in a new era where you don't just take phone calls, oftentimes from the olds and the sames. And in order to bring more people to the table, it would be better to create multiple avenues through which the audience could feel like it was involved in the show and not just the callers.
It also predates texting.
That's correct. So that just became logical. And I thought that was an important thing to do, not, again, from some kind of moral or ethical standpoint, but simply because it only made sense that you want people to feel like they have a chance anyway to be involved. And a lot of people look at callers kind of like, I wouldn't want to be that.
Right.
I don't call in. I listen to the show, but I would never call in. And so we took emails. And I believe it was a regular occurrence, and some of you who, I mean, you're talking probably less than 2% of people who listen now, listened to me when I was on with Frank Cusimano doing what was truly his show, and I was sidekick boy. In 2003 and part of 2004, I would read emails, I believe. And then when Martin and the Cat would come in, when Frank was out, and we had the press box became the sandbox, because that was the way the olds insulted the show for not being Frank's show, was calling it the sandbox. But we're like, good, we don't really want you to like it. It's not for you. So we just kept calling it the sandbox. Then we would read emails. And I believe, and producer Joe would know this, that from the beginning of the morning grind, we did email of the day. I could be off on that. But either way, it's been going on for easily the vast majority of this show's existence. It's just a matter of if it's been going on since the very beginning. You know what I'm going to do, Jackson?
Text producer Joe.
You're goddamn right I am.
You texted me earlier today.
Yeah, what did he text you about?
The show Beef.
And he says it's a great show.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's already was on my list, but Prod Joe's recommendation I take very seriously. Yeah, email of the day. It's got to be one of like the only, like by far the longest running daily, I guess you can call it a segment, but more of like a activity is the wrong word also. Like one of the longest running things on the show is the email of the day. It's like the only thing we always do every single day.
Yeah, and it's just it was the goal of it, I guess. I mean, you never thought it would turn into what it is now, but the goal of it was a way for people to just communicate, kind of wrap up the show or opinions.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Frank and I did. So we had to be doing it on the morning grind from the beginning. Had to, because I remember that, and Frank would really like some, and then some would kind of venture into perversion. Obviously, that's not Frank's thing,
sure.
But the awkwardness made it entertaining.
Yeah.
And so I think we were probably doing it from the beginning. I just texted producer Joe to see if he remembers. So, but I would get ripped on for being a Jim Rome ripoff because I was doing emails. And I'm like, oh no, I'm a Howard Stern ripoff. So let's get this correct. So, and then the vote, I don't really recall having a specific order to it. I mean, now I just look around the dais. I go over to Doug, I go over to Iggy, and then if there is a tie after I vote, then I go to the Plowhawk. But it's not a person thing. I think today with Doug out, you voted first.
Yeah,
I just went to that chair.
Right.
But if Doug were here and Iggy were out and you were in Iggy's chair, I would go to Doug first. But it's not like a, here are my friends in order, if you pay attention. You know, I know he's not saying that, but yeah, I don't know. And then you got to think of like, well, you don't have to, but I will think of the things that became like themes for the email of the day. And one of them was producer Joe being into gentlemen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it turned into sexually harassing Doug.
That's true.
Right.
That's a great observation.
Made that evolution. And now it's kind of just all over the place with a little bit
I would
of
say
that.
it's a lot of Iggy now.
Yeah. The daily recaps of what Iggy used to say back in peak Carlos Spicy Wiener territory when he was really putting his Hall of Fame resume together. His were like I believe Ken happened was
correct.
Was a theme, and those were some of the finest emails you'll ever hear. I mean, go from Plops, Dotham's emails have been outstanding over the years.
I mean, the greatest email for my money was Misty Plops and the Vianney father-son or stepdad calendar or whatever the hell it was.
Incredible.
Holy crap.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible.
God, that was so good.
And I think Buck Swope brought up yesterday, and this definitely plays on the skeleton, is Doug reading the Misty Plops email from when you guys were at spring training. And I guess you guys were printing them out back then as opposed to you having access to the inbox. And so they just handed Doug the emails. He said some beachy boy pigs and lathering up sunscreen with 5-inch flip-flops. Hilarious. Hilarious.
It was just so well written. It was comedic genius,
Yeah.
is what it was. But yeah, it's just become it's an inadvertent tradition on the program. It's the best way I can describe it, and it's something that people, loyal listeners of TMA look forward to
Definitely.
on a regular basis.
Definitely. No matter what, when I was listening from like the beginning of when I started listening, even if I couldn't listen to the whole show that day, I always went to the end to listen to emails of the day because I always loved it. I always thought it was a hilarious.
You always enjoyed emailing.
When I got Private Citizen Pete into the show, I first just started playing him email the day, and he thought they were hilarious. He thought they were hilarious.
He could get it even without knowing the show.
Right. He just thought, like, once I explained like the basic context around it, he totally got it. And then I think he went on one long car trip to Springfield, Missouri, and listened to the show in its entirety. He listens every day ever since.
Jackson, I could be incorrect on this, but I believe you have mentioned that while you and your mom are Jewish, that some of the other members of your family are not. Oh, maybe that was are Jewish, but then just wrote or are Jewish, that some of the other members of your family are not. I was curious of your experience in being raised in a household that had mixed faith background. Were you raised Jewish, or were you exposed to different faiths at a younger age and then made a decision to follow the Jewish faith when you were older? I totally understand if this is deemed too personal for you to discuss on the show. I've always been fascinated by people who have different backgrounds and experiences from me and how that impacted their lives. I often compare those to my own experiences to better understand why I follow the faith I do, and in no way am I judging or evangelizing to you about your faith and background. That's from not caller Adam. P.S. Again, I'm enjoying the show.
Love that question. It goes back to my favorite tenet from Ted Lasso: be curious, not judgmental. And not caller Adam is a prime example there of being curious. And I love that. And it's not too personal. I'll get into it a little bit. So my family situation is my mom and dad were both divorced before they got together. My father had 2 children with his ex-wife, who are my brother and sister. Now, they're technically, of course, my half-brother and sister because we don't have the same mother. We always just call it brother and sister.
Okay.
When my dad describes it as, you don't love them half as much, so why would you call them your half-brother, half-sister? And I always love that because I do. I love my brother and sister like crazy. They're just my brother and sister. But we have different moms. My mother is Jewish. Her whole family is Jewish. And she wanted to raise me Jewish. My dad was very cool with that. My dad comes from a Christian background. He's not, I would not describe him as very religious nowadays, nor my brother and sister, but I don't want to speak for them. But I know my mom is proud of her Jewish heritage and wanted to raise me Jewish. My dad was totally cool with that. So from a young age, I was raised Jewish, went to Hebrew school after public school when I was a kid, bar mitzvahed, and still this day am. So yeah, that's, so it was never odd in that sense.
Yeah.
My family, my brother and sister and father very much embraced my mother's Jewish roots and my Jewish roots. My brother was actually married with a chuppah, which is the kind of tent thing over the bride and groom as a nod to my lovely mother. You know who officiated that wedding was the great Vahe Gregorian.
Oh, is that right?
A very close family friend of ours, because my mom and him at the Post-Dispatch, and a wonderful human being, and someone my brother holds very dearly. And so my brother shouted out, my sister, we always celebrate Hanukkah all together, so it's a very loving acceptance of different backgrounds.
Huh.
So it's very.
It was a non-issue. It sounds like
not
like 100% non-issue.
Total non-issue. Total like my. I'm very lucky in that sense to come from a family where, like, obviously, like, my father gets divorced, but my brother and sister love my mom. I love my brother and sister's mom. It's very, very, very. We're very lucky.
What's that interaction?
It's totally.
Everything is good there.
Yeah, she's so sweet and lovely to me, and I love her. And then my brother and sister love my mom like another mother. It's really, really awesome.
Oh, God bless America.
Really, really, really great.
That's probably not the majority of situations in a spot like that.
Yeah.
Not to say it's like 1 in 100, but I would imagine more often than not, there's just some. You don't have what you're talking about. You're talking about like a perfect set of circumstances, it seems.
Totally. And I'm not speaking for my brother and sister, but it's really, really great that we have such a cool dynamic. My brother and sister love my mom's side of the family, who obviously they have no blood relation to, but still treat like family. It's I'm very, very lucky in that sense. If anyone ever has praised me based on like maturity or the way I conduct myself, it is all a credit to my wonderful family, the environment I grew up in.
How about that? That's
Yeah.
great to hear.
Yeah, totally. So I love that question from Not Colorado.
Nicely done, Not Colorado. He asks wonderful questions. He's a QFTA Hall of Famer as well. I didn't even think about it as I'm reading. I'm like, oh yeah, that's got to be interesting. Now, I mean, to have two different, would it be denominations of Christianity? I ask the Jewish person.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
But
I think
like
that might
I know,
be it.
like Presbyterian, Lutheran, Baptist, those kind of
Right.
things. Right.
So I, by definition, am Catholic.
Right.
My wife is Lutheran, and we weren't going to have our kids baptized. And then, for family reasons, just to kind of like appease, I suppose. Not that there was like a real, big deal about it, but it's like, okay. I mean, if it doesn't mean anything to us, then it doesn't mean anything. You know what I mean?
Right.
Do you follow that?
Yeah. Like, one way or another.
So it's like if you hold the magic musical instrument, and you're like, okay, sure, I'll hold the magical musical instrument. Like, ooh, you're holding the magic, but to me, it's not magical. So
right. So it's just
so
like
here,
sequential.
my son can hold the magic.
Sure.
I don't really care. So I'm like, okay, well, that makes them happy, and for my sound, there's no downside. I mean, it took a couple afternoons out of my day or out of my life, but other than that, but they were baptized Lutheran, so I guess I'm the lone Catholic in the house. Never really thought about it.
Right.
I maybe perhaps until now, I guess I'm aware of it, but I don't think about it. But I guess that would be different than, certainly, I think, different as far as it's different religions, I guess, but it's not I don't even say extreme, but it's not as different as
Right.
a Christian father and Jewish mother.
Right. Yes. It is different in that sense. Yeah, totally. But I also understand that there's many differences between each. Is sect the right word? Probably not. Sect is probably.
I think denomination. I think it's denomination.
Yeah. So I think I know that there are differences between the denominations, but it's all worshiping Jesus Christ, if I'm not mistaken. Right? I don't know.
Yeah, there's that, and then there's justifying disliking people because there's differences from you, and then you pick out passages.
Okay, gotcha.
So you can do that too.
And also governing using religion.
Ideally.
Yeah, that's what we want. Separation of church and state.
That's correct, yeah. Read the founders. So, yeah, I don't really think of it that I'm in that household, but I guess I'm in that household. I'm the head of that household, and I didn't realize it until I'm like, oh, that's interesting, Jackson. And I go, oh, son of a bitch. I guess I have that, but I don't see it as, I think Lutheranism, I had to look that up, and Catholicism are really similar.
Okay.
But I recall sitting at a wedding that was at a Catholic church, and I was near someone who was of Lutheran faith, and I guess one of the things with regard to, you said it's called Lutheranism, Jackson?
Yes.
Thank you.
I said that, and me alone.
They're not as big into the celebration of Mary. Mm-hmm. And this person said, that's one thing I just don't get about Catholics is how they believe this Mary stuff. And I'm going, I mean, immediately, I thought, well, you can buy in all the other stuff.
That's right where my head went.
But
it's like once you start picking and choosing.
Right, but it's like, I'm just like, nah, fine.
Yeah.
I don't really care. Doesn't matter. It's just like, I'm not going to be like, hold on a second here. Nah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I like the teachings of religions oftentimes that are not hijacked by, take your pick of whatever group that hijacks many of them, because I think they're beautiful and they're wonderful things to live by.
Yeah.
And man, sure would be wonderful if there's truth in Christianity. My God, it'd be the greatest thing ever. But the teachings I can subscribe to. The thing that strikes me as odd, and I can't really speak to other lands, but I feel like in the United States at this moment, a healthy percentage of Americans use Christianity as the blanket behind which to justify acting like complete assholes. which is the antithesis of what I recall. Maybe I just read like the Catholic Bible. I don't know, but I thought it was universal as to what was taught in the New Testament by Jesus Christ. And I'm like, well, this acting like this wasn't really what he was doing. But maybe my 9 years of studies, didn't. Maybe I didn't. Now it's a new thing where you act like an asshole, and then you say, but I'm Christian, and then you can do it. I.e., the reference to the scripture and the dog avatars, so popular, at least at one time on Twitter. I don't get on there as much as I'd like to.
Right, to view them. Yeah, I think a big reason why I have a positive relationship with religion in that sense is I grew up Reformed Jew, so there's Reform.
What do we got going on here? Teach me something. I don't know about this.
I guess maybe these are denominations. I don't think they are, just like different maybe classifications. I don't know. I don't want to say the wrong thing. So if I'm wrong in any of this, I apologize. Reformed Judaism, there's conservative Judaism, which takes some of the teachings more seriously, and then, of course, Hasidic Orthodox.
Is that the same, Hasidic and Orthodox?
That's a good question that I'm not positive on. Orthodox Judaism, if you see people walking to temple, they often wear a certain type of clothes. They take Shabbat very seriously.
I'll see that sometimes when I go by Markwards on Delmar.
Correct. U City is a very much originally like a very Jewish area because there was a bunch of Orthodox temples in that area.
Is that right?
So people could walk, because if you're going to walk to temple every day, you want to make it a shorter walk if you can. So that's why U City has a lot of Orthodox Jewish people there. There's multiple temples you can go to in that area. But I was raised Reform, and my interpretation, and again, I'm not speaking for all Reformed Jews, but my interpretation was it was kind of a modernized form of Judaism where like you're taking much more of the values and the teachings more so than the actual scripture, and you're kind of are allowed to, find some gray area there, and it's much more important, like the idea of being a good person and committing acts of random acts of kindness, a mitzvah on people, and just being as good a person as you can, much more so than like the actual scripture of the Old Testament. And I think that's why I always enjoyed it, because it was just like teaching you like about being a good person and the history of Judaism and stuff like that. And that's why I think I still connect with it in a way. I just find religion in general fascinating.
I do as well.
Yeah.
And whereas like if I'm with someone who is like, it's not like an argument of I'm right and you're wrong or vice versa. I guess I'm curious. I'm not trying to, be curious because I know that's some. But I mean, that's why I like doing sound story interviews and interviews in general, and doing this and interacting with people. So I'm like, oh, okay, so we're coming from on that. So religion. I mean, my God, what could be more fascinating than that?
Right.
And also with regard to political philosophy, not necessarily like, speeches and nonsense, but actual political philosophy when it comes to government. But those two topics are certainly considered by most to be taboo, and understandably so. I totally understand it. But like how religions came to be, how they're currently practiced, why some went away, why some surged, that kind of history interests me, because it also plays a role in direct correlation with humanity and or nations and their founding, or nations and their destructions. So that truly intrigues me. Producer Joe texted me, by the way, on the email today, says, I'm not at the if not at the very, very beginning, it started within weeks. I should have some show sheets at home when I can look at when I get back. So, yeah, looks like at the very least from the early dates of the morning grind to the morning after, which I would figure, because I was reading them on the press box with Frank Cusimano. So I don't know why we wouldn't have done it on the morning grind. All right, I'm going to go with the last one. Jackson, we're going to do a half hour. Wow. What do you think about that?
Wow.
Got things I got to do.
I hear you, baby.
This one was sent in today, and I feel like it's a good little kicker at the end. Tim, you may not be able to go into this much, but I've always been interested in the backstory. Listening to the 590 The Man press conference on the TMA all day, how did it come to be that Jack Clark and Frank Cusimano were both speakers about their new shows that would be on 590 The Man, but then when you started 920, both of them were there at the start? To me, Frank sounded like a hostage, telling the world that everything is all good when he spoke at the press conference, but Jack was gung-ho about his show. Also, do you know if Twist and Smash ever got into measuring on the show, on their show? I always thought that was the weirdest part of that whole presser. Love the show. That's from Howard Thompson. I don't remember. I don't know what the measuring thing's in reference to.
I have no idea.
The thing about what was going on during that press conference in our studio is we were laughing so hard. We certainly heard some of it, but I'm sure if I were to listen to it on TMA all day, I would hear things and not realize that they were said because we were laughing so hard. And that's kind of like, everybody talks about Dan Marshall, and understandably so, because he was kind of the spokesperson, but you got a peek at someone else who was just as, if not more, responsible for everything that had happened that led to that taking place, and that's the other guy talking, and that's Todd Robbins. And when I said on yesterday's QFTA, I told this, I think it was yesterday, when I told the story about being in Palm Springs and being on the phone when we were at the Madison Club before flying with Anthony Kim. The person I was on the phone with was Todd Robbins for at least dating back to 2011, and the Man and Woman press conference, I think, was March of 2013. So you're talking about 18-plus months, at least. He was trying to get me to run the station, but it was a weird, I don't even know how to describe, it was such a weird spot. He was trying to get me to run the station, but there wasn't like hey, like if I were to say, hey, Jackson, I'd like to hire you to run Sound Story, I think there would be an understanding of you shall receive an offer sheet with your responsibilities and your financial terms and or health insurance, 401k, and bonus structure.
Yeah.
It's kind of ABC in the working world.
Unless you said, would you like to volunteer? Would you like to be a volunteer? That language needs to be added if you're doing it for free.
So that was one of the things we could never, and they were kind of like warring factions at that time in KFNS. And I was caught in the middle because all I really wanted to do was do the show. Our situation was profitable. They hated, I think, I don't know if they hated, but it was irritating that we were profitable and they were losing all this money. And so, he had, for 18 months, pursued me. And then I remember the weekend of that all going down in 2013, and Todd, avoided my phone call. I doubt I still have the text. It'd be amazing if I did. There are people in the show's history who everybody knows, and then, those texts aren't still around. And then blames everything on, and certainly some of it's accurate, but a lot of it is just not. But again, we haven't gone on and aired it out. But he was certainly he's just not as well known as some of the others. But if you've heard that press conference, I don't feel like I need to say anything. You heard it, you understand. That was the great thing about that, is that it was out so people could hear it, and it's like we don't need to say anything. But over that weekend, before that press conference, before the deal with Marshall, we met. I had a group of people who were interested in some kind of deal. We met with Rick Lehman at his office in Kirkwood. He was an owner. I think there was representation, or Todd was there, and we put an offer on the table. And then the next day, he calls back, and the number had moved up for the price. And that's just not really something, when our group was composed of, some people who are used to doing that they're kind of like, well, what is this?
And I had doing things certain ways.
And I had accountants and lawyers, from that were just kind of used to standard mergers and acquisitions, and they're like, what is this? Yeah. And I'm like, here you go. Welcome.
Yeah.
Welcome, friends. You've never seen anything like this. And if we work together for a while, we're both going to see things we've never seen before. Come, grab my hand. Let's dive into AM radio in St. Louis. And so he does a deal with Dan Marshall. The terms were phenomenal as far as the dollars go. I mean, holy shit. And Dan, for whatever reason, was so high on Bubba the Love Sponge. And that's fine because, hey, maybe he would have been right. How I knew it wasn't going to work, I mean, there's certainly behavioral tells and, other tells, like the way somebody would write an email, and if it's not punctuated and spelled right, that's going to usually be an indication that might be a problem as far as running a business. But the big thing was, we're going to put you after Bubba, and then you're going to have such a strong lead-in with Bubba's ratings that your ratings will be higher. And I'm going, you can't get ratings on KFNS. It's nothing against KFNS. We were on KFNS probably more than any other place we've ever been on, but you can't get ratings there. And if you're going to base your business model and your revenue on ratings, the whole thing, that's the foundation, then therefore the whole house is going to go down.
Right.
And so I barely knew Jack Clark. I certainly knew Frank. We just spent time on talking about how I worked with him, but I had known him going back to the 1990s. I interned at KFNS. And he was super helpful to me coming out of college with calling on my behalf at TV stations, which just helped, them at least pay attention to what was a VHS tape at that time. But there for the people who had options, I suppose, there was no way they were going to work there because everybody kind of knew that it wasn't going to work, but you just were going to get as much as you could while you could before it went out of business. And so when Iggy tells the story, and I can speak to this because I was a part of the story, he does tell the story completely accurately. I don't remember what he was making for his time on TMA. He was like the second producer to producer Joe. And then Stedman was the board operator at that time with Doug the Cat and myself. I believe that was the lineup at that time. And then Joe was leaving the show. Producer Joe was leaving the show at that time. I think Joe's last show was the press conference day. I mean, holy shit, if you're going to go out.
Right, well, the perfect way.
Oh, my God. So Iggy calls me and says something along the lines of, hey, Marshall offered me this. I make this at KFNS. And I said, hey, man, if you want to take that, it was substantially more than he was making. Be my guest. My only, and you're not going to hurt nobody's ever going to, you got to do what you got to do.
Right.
But I would caution you that it's probably not going to be around long. So think about that as far as the math goes, right, because you might be making that rate, but it might not be around in a year, so you might not ever get that dollar figure. With that said, it's not my situation at that time. We didn't know for sure where we were going to wind up. And one of the spots we could have wound up, we would have been employees, and then therefore I couldn't have dictated who was on the show. And so if they said, we don't want Iggy, we want you and Doug and the Cat, then he turns that thing down with the man and woman. That would have been brutal, especially when it's a raise.
Right.
So, I mean, he catches shit. I mean, he just catches shit from the audience. It's part of the show. But for that man and woman thing, but I get it. I totally get it. And I know, I think the exact dollar figure difference, it was substantial for him at that time. So I totally get it. I think we all knew that it was gonna, it was a running joke. When we started 920, I talked with Fox Sports, NBC Sports, CBS Sports, which is what eventually our affiliate became, just to build credibility, and put CBS Sports 920, because otherwise most people no idea what 920 was. So it was just a way to create a brand.
Yeah.
And I would talk with these people, and they're all over the country, and they're going, oh, are you in the market with that man and woman thing that's going on? Because it was getting covered, and people were just like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, it was talked about around the country because people thought it was going, like the people thought, because I think they thought it was an April Fool's joke. Because I think there was something that happened on April 1st, but I mean, obviously now it wasn't. It was so, you have to have revenue, which I know it's like, you don't say, but so many people have gone, well, I'll get the personalities and then the revenue will take care of itself. And you can't do that. You have to have. I will take a great sales staff over a great on-air lineup every single day. I also realize anybody listening to this that they might go, what in the hell's that about? But I'm just telling you that's the case for this kind of radio, this kind of setup that was KFNS and 1380 at that time. With regard to Jack and to Frank, you're in a spot there with someone who ran things, and I would imagine probably most people have been in situations where, it's like this for you, I'm sure, I would think. I mean, I realize this is a much bigger company. But you knew when we were at KFNS, you just kind of had to just shut your mouth, get in and out. And, if you were called to speak at a press conference on behalf of KFNS, you probably would have done it.
Right.
Because you knew what it was.
Yeah.
That kind of, if you want to call it leadership, but that kind of management is what I would call it.
You just don't want to rock the boat, essentially.
Because otherwise you're just going to get popped.
Yeah.
So you can picture political administrations where if you're not blindly loyal, whether they be domestic or elsewhere, the situation.
Yeah.
There's a lot of turnover in those administrations oftentimes. So that is why in that spot, Frank's just being a good soldier. You didn't have to be a wizard to know he wanted nothing to do with it. And then Jack Clark, who I really didn't know. And I would tell you, even though I guess we're tied together in history, which is really amazing to me because I grew up watching him in his home run in Game 6 against the Dodgers, one of my favorite childhood memories. And I'd tell you, he's a great guy. He's an absolutely great guy. I feel badly for him, really. But he's a really good man. I haven't seen him in a decade, but when you're provided the opportunity to leave or to stay there, I didn't expect there'd be a lot of need for negotiating.
Right.
Nobody who had a choice wanted to stay there. If you stayed there, you didn't really have a choice in the business,
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that could sound harsh. It's not intended to sound harsh. It just was kind of the way things were at that time. That doesn't mean those people weren't talented. It's just like what Dan was doing was he was paying a bunch of people who had been successful at one point in broadcasting, but probably weren't working at like a Hubbard or an Emmis or a CBS, which owned KMOX at the time, or a KTRS. And so, these were the people who he was fans of. And so if somebody all of a sudden comes along and is overpaying, it was like live golf for St. Louis radio, actually. And if you knew it had no,
Right.
You knew what the situation was, but you also knew people were like, oh, I can get a bunch of money? Holy shit. I guess so. That's what it was. And so that's why Frank and Jack and hell, it wasn't like there wasn't one conversation whatsoever where somebody even negotiated. Now that I think about it, it was just, yeah.
I'm in.
And it was the negotiating that went on was where we were going to wind up going.
Right.
That was the process. That was a hell of a process. That was brutal. And I really don't think about it. It didn't ever get public, ever. But that's when my first conversation, that's the first time I met Tommy Mattern was that time. Because Tommy, who I guess I had known his name, but I would have never been able to recognize him. I remember we got together at what is now Wheelhouse.
Oh, wow.
It was Jay Bucks.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that
God,
was the same
I'm virtually certain that's what it was. God, I hadn't even thought about that. Holy shit, that's the case. I'm pretty sure about that. I don't even have the YouTube
There's
chat
multiple
open.
locations, right?
Yeah, there was one in Clayton.
Right, and that's like Capitol Grill now?
Oh, thank you, Don. Yes, it is. 920 was one of the best stations in the market. I appreciate that. That's from Toy Maltese Family.
Nice. That was my first, when I first started listening, you guys were on 920. That's when I came in.
Yeah.
Did a little school project.
That's right. I remember
I really
that.
want to get that project back. It's really fun.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, it's like
Just wonderful work on the part of all parties.
Well, no, from like our standpoint, it was dog shit. But
who was with you? Herb.
No, my buddy Jason.
And he goes
guy.
by Private Citizen Pete.
I don't know if I'll just go with his name is Jason. Wonderful human.
So cryptic.
He no longer lives in St. Louis, but I love him. And we did that project, and I would love to get that back.
It'd be wonderful.
Just like a cool snapshot.
I love when I see these old TMA and...
Yeah, it's great stuff. Like Doug's great in it.
I remember you being in.
Yeah. It was really fun. That was great. That was like,
How old were you? Well, you're 16. 15 or 16, because it was 2014, right?
Yeah, 16. It would have been like May of 2014.
Recovering Alcoholic says, I'll gape that Jason. So he wants all of your friends.
Yeah, I should have used a different.
I appreciate that on the 920 is one of the best stations in the market. And the fact that, well, I mean, the fact, it's certainly an opinion, but the fact that we turned something, and as I made reference to yesterday, that we were paying, high 20s, $1,000 a month for that airtime, and to make that profitable. It's a shame because KFNS, with what we were planning on doing, could have been, and we would have been there. We could have stayed at 920 for good if Bert wouldn't have, doubled the rent, which is what happened in less than 3 years. And had we implemented what we were doing at 920 at 590, I was the president of the station, but in title only.
Right.
And we could have done some really good things, because if you're profiting and you've got 25 to 30% of your budget is going to be removed from an expense standpoint. Now you're inheriting some new costs, so it's not clear like, oh, well, we were spending 30 and now we just don't have that. You have costs that you're now inheriting when you own it. But either way, it was set up for success, and it just, that is a shame. That bothers me. I don't know. I'm talking about something that I know no one knows what I'm talking about. I'm talking about 2016. Like if I could have and should have dug in further and gone, hey, my job title in my contract says I'm in charge. I know I don't own everything, but I'm in charge. You gotta, if you gave me this responsibility, let me run the offense. And if a year in it's not working financially, this isn't about what your friends like on air.
Right.
Okay, that's not what we're doing here. Right. We determine success by the P&L. Yeah. But I remember like when Martin came on board, for example, and Martin never worked at 920. I don't think. Virtually certain he didn't. And we got together, and Martin, absolutely, super talented, ball buster, cuts to the chase, doesn't fuck around. And he's really like, and also not a guy that gets too high, and also not a guy that's like going to jerk you off because he needs the job.
Right.
That there's that. He's just, it's my kind of conversation.
Straight shooter.
Absolutely. And he's like, this could be what we've always kind of felt like it could finally be, and we've lived through so much nonsense that this could be it. Now we could finally really be building something. And he was really excited. And then within like a few months, he's like, what the fuck did you get me into? I'm like, brother, I've already handed my ownership back and gotten away from my position. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Because what we thought it was going to be versus what it turned out to be. Yeah. And Martin was obviously very outspoken. Well, obviously to us, because there's like a Sunday night email that he sent, and and then there was a meeting. And he is, as the hockey kids would say, he's a beauty. He is an absolute beauty. But yeah, that station, with Strauss and Burwell. So I'm telling you, Strauss, Burwell, and Charlie Marlowe could have been a show that, obviously tragic ends with the health of Brian Burwell and Joe Strauss passing a year after. But with Charlie running point and Burwell and Strauss's dynamic, that's an afternoon drive show that could have been, a foundation for a station, much less than you have TMA in the morning. And Frank followed us. Yeah. Shit. That really was. I am very proud of that. I am very proud of that, because it was brutal to get it off the ground, but it did work when it was all said and done. And we could have done the same thing over at KFNS, and it just,
yeah,
that was rough.
Quick question.
I'm taking questions.
Sure. Did Charlie on 920 also do a show with Rennie Knott? Wasn't there?
Yes.
Okay.
At the outset, I believe, God, I don't know what the exact lineup was. I really don't. I mean, I think Rennie may have joined like a month in. I don't know. Strauss and Burwell were in from the beginning. Rennie was not in from the beginning. Charlie was in from the beginning. And then when we had the Jack Clark thing, I mean, a week in, I mean, truly just like,
Brutal.
Oh my God. But then obviously then the whole lineup changed. And I think that's when Charlie started maybe working with, I think maybe Burwell and Strauss moved to the afternoons, I think. I don't know.
Got it. Well, I asked
But
that.
for a week, Charlie was working with them.
Yeah.
And running point, and they would bust his balls, but they would bust each other's balls. It had like a credible, more sports TMA feel to it, because you had Charlie, who's from the TMA, family,
Right.
and then Strauss and Burwell that truly had, and it's obviously people would go, well, Wilbon's black and Kornheiser's white, but they really that's what Joe told me. I said, who would you like to work with? I want you on the station because I know you will be good for the station. And he goes, well, I know he's had a few shots on the market and it didn't go well, but Burwell and I are really close and we have a dynamic, and I can call him any name in the world that would get me fired if I were to say it publicly. And I'm like, oh. And he can call me any name in the world that would get him fired. And I go, oh.
Maybe keep those names off.
Right. He goes, but we just have a really close relationship. And I'm like, that's all I needed to hear, which really could have been a total mistake. But when he said that, I'm like, that's what I want. Because in my mind, that's what you need on a show. As long as you have credibility. And their credibility was already in.
Yeah.
So if you have that dynamic, and then I'm like, okay, this isn't like somebody who's been everywhere and, this is Brian Burwell and Joe Strauss. This is good. And then with Charlie with him, but Charlie was doing TV, so he couldn't do Afternoon Drive because he's doing TV.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I asked the Rennie question because probably my junior or senior year in high school, Rennie was at Ladue High School shooting B-roll of our practice. My best friend, Mark, great ball player, he was interviewing him because he was having an unreal senior year. And we're just practicing, running up and down, and I just go over to Rennie. I can't remember what their show name was. I think it was called Miller Relief. I think that's what it was called. I think it was called Miller Relief. And I just looked at him and I said, I loved Miller Relief, and ran back. And you would have thought he saw an alien because he's like, this fucking 15-year-old is saying that he liked my AM radio show in the afternoons with Charlie Marlowe.
It was Charlie and him middays.
Yeah.
And I think it was Charlie Strauss and Burwell middays at the start.
Got it. Okay.
I think.
Okay.
And then I guess, then Charlie and Rennie, and just holy shit.
Baller lineup, yeah.
It was a great lineup.
For real.
But it also was matched with a good sales staff.
Right.
And that's what matters, when it's all said and done. What was did I answer the questions? I think I answered the questions. This was about, so that was so to answer the question, why they said they were going to be there, because they didn't know what I would have done exactly what they did in that spot. I mean, Jack and I hadn't talked. I don't even know if Frank and I had talked. We all just knew we were in a spot where it wasn't going to last. So you just, it's a totally different spot than, even though that was only still not 11 years ago, it happened in March of 2013. For example, not that anybody's expecting this, but let's say Hubbard sold and said, all right, Nitwit's on HD2, you're out. I'd just go, well, that sucks,
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't go, oh my God, we got to now find a radio station. What would we do? We'd live stream, we'd be on YouTube, and we'd podcast. In 2013, that wasn't an option.
No.
So it's just, it's a totally different mindset, which is truly liberating, because the headache of that time, if there was a headache, while people rave about the lineup, most of the revenue came through TMA. But because I was on TMA and also operating the station, I think people say, well, you're only saying that because it's your show. And it's just not the case. TMA was generating the lion's share of the revenue. It's, but you want others. That's what I'm saying about the show with Charlie, Burwell, and Strauss. Could have been you could have had a TMA-esque revenue stream. People might have liked one show and not liked the other. I don't know, maybe liked both. Maybe they didn't like either. But either way, advertisers would have gotten return on investment from that show had it been an afternoon drive. But anyway, with Martin, yeah, we were thinking that we could really be on the verge of something, and this could be it, and this could kind of end it. And I remember that's what we were thinking. I remember getting together in January of 17, and God, I don't remember. I was asked a question, and I said, yeah, I don't think, and this was about Martin specifically and what Martin was going to make. But my responsibility is to manage a budget, and I know what our advertising revenue is, and I know what our expenses are. And the question was, do you think we should hire him? I said, well, he may be the most talented person in the market, but at this price point and where we currently are as far as revenue goes, and then also with the availability in TMA as far as ad inventory and sponsorships go, and Cusimano's show, in our afternoon shows, we have things to sell. So to add expense onto that, right. I think our best case scenario would be, this is an NBA free agency where 5 offers come in. Let's wait and see how we do in year 1, and at the end of, like in the fourth quarter of 2017, let's see where we are, and if we're profiting or if we're making progress, then now we can add to that by bringing on an incredibly talented person in Martin Kilcoyne. And Randy Markell was the one I was having the conversation with. But I don't work that way. And I go, okay, well, we have a difference of opinion on how to go about doing this. And then if that's the case, you own it. But if I'm the one that's supposed to be operating it, then what's the point of me having the title of being president if I'm telling you what I think is in the best interest of the business? Let's not add expense when we're upside down at the moment because of expense, and the station's 3 months old. It wouldn't be wise to do that, in my opinion. Now, Randy came from the thought process that you hire talent and then the sales would follow. And I came from the thought process that you hire sales and then build up revenue. And then if you do get it going, then take that money and bring on talent. But until you are sold out in TMA and Frank Cusimano's show, there's no need to be adding on to expenses. And maybe this is all in the weeds, but that's the thought process. It is by definition, without question, philosophical differences. Mm-hmm. And by the end of it, I don't think Randy would mind me saying this. He goes, "Bud, it turns out you were right." But I don't think it was like, this is what I had done. How he had built his business was in Chuck's boots. I could never do that. I don't know that industry. Could never do it. Couldn't do it, 1% of what he was able to build. I don't know anything about it. But this is what I knew. I had done it, and I had become well aware that you have to have sales. I mean, again, this is all, it might sound so results oriented, but that was kind of the defining moment where I'm like, hey, plus Anna Marie had just gotten pregnant, mm-hmm. and we had a real big scare. She thought she lost Jameson in the first weekend, I believe, of 2017. It was a brutal weekend. I mean, it happened on Saturday morning, so you can't get to the doctor until Monday. And we thought he was gone. I mean, we thought he was gone. And the stress that we were experiencing at that time, I'm just like, I can't do this. So I don't care if I'm giving money back or I'm giving up title or ownership. It doesn't matter. I gotta, after years of thinking we weren't gonna be able to have a child, I gotta just do TMA, and that's it. But yeah, that I suppose if there's one on the timeline where I look at it and I go, that was the chance for like a station to really establish itself and outside of 101 and compete with 101, like truly compete for dollars. It would never do as much as 101 does. And by that I mean is billing, mm-hmm. because 101's this monster FM. Right. But it could cut into the market, and that matters. It was that moment. It was that moment, and in that sense, that's a shame. And I don't go, but it all wound up working out. I don't look at it that way, and maybe that would be a healthier way. It did, but that was a tough time, And it was a lot of stuff that didn't have to happen and really shouldn't have happened. And it caused a lot of headaches for the guys on this show. You weren't a part of it for almost all of it. And it just didn't have to happen. It was really, really unfortunate. And it could have been super profitable, I think. I think it could have been really successful. And that part is disappointing. The man and woman had no chance. The man and woman had never had a chance. Never, ever had a chance. And 920 we could have stayed there. But again, the gentleman who owned it, it's the proverbial pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered. I mean, that's what happened there. And I'm sure he wishes he had that one back, because we would have stayed there for a long time if the rent didn't increase 200 and some odd %. So anyway, Jackson, here I said I'm going to do a half hour, and then what happens? We do an hour.
Yeah.
Or in 50 minutes.
55, but it's been a wonderful time.
Let's see. I just need to know where Claves is at all times. He issued a statement to me that once he takes a ride, it's all over for this boy. I saw that actually take place when the recovering alcoholic witnessed him offering him up to Claves, his wife, and Claves kind of like lifted up his belt buckle like he was going to work. And I go, oh boy. And Claves goes, be careful what you ask for. Toy Maltese Falcon. Can you talk about that time? I don't know. I'm trying to get my context, but that's what, do you see? Are you on the YouTube chat? Can you talk about that time? I remember all the work you were putting into the podcast and website while on air. You seem to be the busiest guy in the business. Yeah, if you're talking about the time at 920, without question, because we were doing the morning after. Then I was truly operating that station, at least Monday through Friday when I rent, and then doing afternoon drive in the latter portions of 13, portions of 2013, occasional portions of 2013, but then 2014, and then I guess like the first month or two of 2015 with Jim Edmonds. And I look back on that and I go, I can't believe that was my life. Cannot believe that was my life. But it was necessary to keep the business, or to get the business going and to keep it going. And you look back on it, you go, holy shit, Jim Edmonds did afternoon drive in St. Louis, not that far removed from playing.
Right.
And how good the show was, too. Mm-hmm. But that show generated revenue from title sponsorships and then also from the remotes we did. And so it was necessary, because you could have put anybody else in there and take me out of it. It had nothing to do with me. Jim just needed a point guy. And so I did it, but holy shit. So that's what I mean by timing. If we had children, I don't know what we would have done there.
Very different story.
Yeah, but we didn't. And my wife worked at the station and handled the billing and the traffic. So that was just our life. And we were able to get it off the ground and make it work. And it wound up being an incredibly fun time and super rewarding. I really do look at that. I hadn't thought much about it, honestly, like 2016, like how that could have been like a launching pad. Right. And you can go, well, yeah, it all worked out. And it did, but it took 5 years of just kind of like...
I know it's not without the scars.
Right. That's the truth, man. Yeah. That's the truth.
Yeah.
The cat would absolutely still be on the show, without question. His disdain for John Hadley, which I am not talking out of school about because he talks about it very openly himself, is what really, Jim Hayes had been on the show from 2004 to April of 2017. And had been fired one time, and that was simply a cost-cutting thing on the part of the guys from Atlanta when they brought in Bob Fesco. And to Jason Barrett's credit, he didn't want that to happen. So that wasn't a Barrett thing. They just needed a cost cut. Because, again, you had a group of people come in, overspend, and not have the revenue, which is why I always say the sales thing. And then over the course of August 2017, specifically, actually, September 11th, 2017, to, I guess June 2020, the man had to have been fired 5 times.
Jeez.
Had to have been 5 times. So, as you can imagine, how wouldn't that be stressful for anybody who's going through that?
Right.
Pete was fired at least once, Plowhawk multiple times. Doug was never fired. Iggy was fired on the same voicemail on September 11th, 2017. But I was able to get his job back that night. It took a couple weeks for the Cats. So, yeah. And so you sit there and go, well, it worked out. But I'm like, when I think about it, I'm like, man, that was a lot. And now we just don't deal with any of that here.
None of it.
Just none of it. Just none of it. And so you just if you ever want to have peace of mind, and I know you didn't live it, and I'm not saying that you don't know what we went through, I was a nom, but it's like perspective,
Yeah.
And truth be told, also what I lived through is a hell of a lot different than what Plowboy and Iggy and Doug lived through, because I was in a different spot, and but I also didn't get fired like Iggy did and Plowboy did. But as far as the man and woman thing in the press conference, that's why Frank and anybody who was sticking around would have stood up there and said whatever. Why there was a press? Have you ever seen a press conference and maybe when somebody gets the Cardinals rights or the Blues rights? But I think when the Blues re-upped with 101, I think there was just a press release sent out.
Yeah.
It happened a few months ago.
Yeah, it wasn't.
You're starting an AM radio format and you're holding a press conference?
With room for satellite trucks.
That was unbelievable. That, I guess, was another tell. that was, I don't remember who discovered. I think producer Joe discovered it when he went to print out Email of the Day, and now we come full circle.
Hell yeah.
And he goes, you won't believe what's on the printer. There's instructions for where satellite trucks to park for the press conference. And I can't, but I'm starting to wonder, The Office was popular, and I'm wondering if there's a huge Hollywood play, and this is an act.
Dude, it all gets back to when I pitched a couple months ago the idea of a radio sitcom, an AM sports talk radio sitcom, where you could take all these things that Iggy talks about for his book or stuff like that, and you make it all into episodes.
My favorite show is the Larry Sanders Show. That was about a late night talk show, and it wasn't about the talk show at all. It was about the personality,
and the characters,
flaws and traits of those who are the stars / producers and writers of the show.
Right. Same for The Office. It's not about the actual paper
exactly
company.
Right. So if you take this, and that's what the guy I've talked about, my advisor, he goes, dude, whatever you make from all these places is great. He goes, your real money is in writing, a show based off of all of this, because I would call him, he's in a different world as far as this kind of stuff, even though he's in broadcasting. And I go, dude, I've never heard anything like this before. But he lived it. He lived it, for a decade plus. Let's see. Iggy's DNA asked, how did you succeed in getting the Cat hired back on? Great question. So Cat gets fired on September 11th, 2017. My first day back from paternity was so nice. Iggy gets fired September 11th, 2017. It was a voicemail on my phone. I don't think I still have that one, but I've got a lot of them. I can't imagine I do. Boy, it'd be great if I did, though. Mm-hmm. I do have some from 2018, but not that one. And I'm able to get Iggy back. The Cat was a process, and eventually, I don't recall exactly what he was making. I think I do. And Inside STL wound up having to pay 60% of his salary from what it was. And I asked the fan page, I went on the fan page, and asked, if you really want the Cat back, what I had a plan. I was going to, and I asked people to email me. Probably have them all saved, actually, because I save everything. And I would present them to Randy, and I can recall, I think it was at Three Kings. I think it was. He was sitting there, and I walked in, and, it had been about 2 weeks, and I had a stack of emails, for real, this thick. Mm-hmm. And I said, this is what the audience wants. And I had already made the case, like, so what I did was we created the Cat Chat podcast so I could justify taking money out of Inside STL, of which I own, the vast majority, but still, it's got shareholders. And we'll get his podcast going like we got my podcast going, because I was starting my podcast on October 1st, 2017. So now we'll have the Cat Chat as well. So that's how that started. Right. So because Inside STL had to justify the expense with something, and it wound up just being, so the Cat would get paid 45% of his or 40% of his salary from whatever that company was called, KFNS, and then 60% of it, even though, he was doing the Cat Chat maybe once a week or something, but getting it from Inside STL. Did what we had to do, But I mean, that was the first time, and then it happened again in 2018, and again later on in December of 2018, and it certainly kept happening. And then the final shot was the quote-unquote furlough for the Plowhawk, which was the end, and that came the day after I terminated the letter of intent to buy the station. So that was just we can't get you, but we'll get your people.
Right, but furlough.
Yeah, it was furlough. Yeah. And the Cat did come back for a period of time after that, but then he was permanently gone, I think, in September of 20. So, I mean, it's almost been 4 years, not 4 years, but 3.5 years since he's been on the show. Yeah, so I mean, that's the thing. It's like, yeah, but I mean, I don't go, well, it made us talk. It was really not fun, and it didn't have to be that way. And so it's great that this has happened, and now we're like legitimate, and that like people who are really in the business now know, right, as one of the GSMs says, pound for pound, the most popular show in St. Louis, or the most successful, whatever, it delivers the most for advertisers in St. Louis, pound for pound. But this could have been going on a long time ago. Yeah. It's the same group of motherfuckers,
right? Same
with
show.
The same business mindset, with the same show, Right. So I don't go, yeah, I'm glad
right, no,
because it was not fun. It was really stressful, and it didn't. And the thing is, it didn't have to be that way, So anyway, not to be depressing, but that's the truth. Did Gangster Pete have a breaking point to leave radio, or was it a slow burn? Certainly. I mean, he was. I think Gangster Pete. So you started in November 20?
Early December 20.
The breaking point for Pete was, and I bet I do have these texts. We thought that I bought KFNS in May of 20, and we were going to close like on July 1st, July 2nd, 3rd, something like 2020. And then a week before the deal, the terms were changed, not by our side, and they were non-starter changes to the terms, and that was just like, that's it. And then then the furloughs happened, and then at that point Pete saw,
right,
there's no way that this is going to turn, so I gotta get out. Yeah. And I totally understand. Yeah. I don't fault him at all. If anything, it's and there's a guy who loved this show when he started, had passion for it, kind of like you, really, which would seem amusing to people, and had ideas and would work on things behind the scenes with ideas. And then we were talking about just doing essentially what we kind of wound up doing here, live streaming. I mean, I know we're on the radio, but it's really more of a live stream YouTube thing. So it just was, even though that was only a handful of years ago, it still was kind of unproven. Mm-hmm. Now that we've done it, now it's like, okay, if we wanted to do that, that's viable.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was always kind of the theory. That's why it was important to own the little intellectual property. So then that way we could pick up and go no matter what kind of situation we would run into. But yeah, Gangster Pete's situation was, I think the furloughs, but I mean, it wasn't just the furloughs. It was the holy shit, right. Tim's not going to be able to get this because he can't do this deal, and I got to go because this is going to be, what it is. So, yeah, I guess it was a slow burn, and then it was just like, okay, that's it. There was a breaking point. So, really, truly, that day, the show lost Darren Atkins, Jim Hayes, Pete Eichholz. Yeah. That's really what happened. All right, let's wrap it up. I mean, I wound up going to 12:37. I gotta go, Jackson. For Jackson Burkett, I'm Tim McKernan. This has been the Tim McKernan Show.